Four F1 teams in particular have dominated the 2024 season, that being McLaren, Red Bull, Ferrari, and Mercedes when it comes to the win column. We have 6 races left with a couple of sprints as well on tracks of all different characteristics. We have COTA, Mexico, Brazil, Las Vegas, Qatar, and Abu Dhabi. And with us now knowing after 18 races what the car characteristics are on our top 4, we can go over which car will be fastest and where. Depending on the track could matter a lot for the car characteristics and the downforce level, so we can get a good idea of who could be the quickest and who could be the slowest between the top 4, and whether we really get a championship battle based off of which will be the fastest car in which race. Right before getting into it, I wanted to announce that I am making a second channel. It is made now, so I would love for you guys to go over there and subscribe to it. It's going to be streaming some gaming content as well, just me being me a little bit more rather than just Formula 1. I want to stream to both YouTube and to Twitch. There will be YouTube videos as well coming out for it, shorts as well. Want it to be like a big thing. This channel is still going to be kept and prioritized obviously by me, but I would love your guys' support both on Twitch and YouTube. The links will be in the description. I'll make a community post. It'll probably be mentioned in a couple of other videos as well, as I would love to have you guys on board and having my back per usual. But with that being said, let's get straight into the video. The first track that we start off with is the Circuit of Americas, which out of all 6 tracks offers a bunch of different corner variety that the other 5 don't really have. It's the track where balance is most important. Sector 1's got your high speed corners. Sector 2, you need the straight line speed as well as the braking and slow speed cornering, while that last sector offers a bit of high and medium speed. So if you need a very balanced car, the car in orange is usually the strongest. So McLaren, in my opinion, will have a pretty significant advantage over the other 4 cars. And this track is projecting to have plenty of upgrades, which I will go over as we get closer to that time period for COTA. But this is without us assuming what those upgrades are going to do to the car. We don't have an idea up until we actually see what's on the car and what performance they actually gain out of it. But McLaren to me is in P1. Another very well balanced car, regardless of how its form's been as of lately, is the Red Bull. Tracks with a bit more downforce have been better for them. They've had a better time on them. So we saw them do pretty well in Singapore. Zandvoort was also a pretty good performance. I do expect them to be in P2, but still lagging behind that insanely fast McLaren. Ferrari is going to be in P3. I think their biggest struggle is going to be Sector 1, as both Carlos and Charles have stated that these upgrades have worked on the tracks that they adore, but the tracks that they know they still have those weaknesses in, it'll be interesting to see whether these upgrades have properly worked on the car and the Ferrari can actually settle in and have a good race. Right now I have them projected in P3 with the Mercedes closely following behind. I do think McLaren will have about a 2/10 gap here in COTA. That then brings us to one of the most unique tracks that we have on our F1 calendar, which is Mexico. The track itself actually doesn't have an incredibly unique layout, but what makes it unique is that incredible downforce that's required to actually stick onto a track and still slide a bunch. Because of the altitude this track is put on, it makes for a very interesting race. Driver skill matters a lot here in Mexico as well. We've seen different winners throughout the years, whether you're the fastest car or not, and I truly believe in a very high downforce kit, the McLaren and the Red Bull should be very close together. I have them both in P1 here for Mexico. I have Ferrari very closely following behind, but I wouldn't even count on Mercedes. This will probably be, out of the 6 races, the closest between the 4. That then brings us into one of the best tracks in Formula 1, which is Interlagos, Brazil. This is a track that does offer every type of corner speed, but in comparison to COTA, you actually run lower downforce in Brazil because of how big the straight is and the amount of time you gain on it. It's also one of the quickest laps we have throughout the season. Brazil offers a very unique challenge to the drivers, but setting up the car is super important here, and if you don't get that right, we saw what happened to Red Bull in 22, but then we also saw the opposite of in 23 when they did set up the car correctly. McLaren has been strong here in both 22 and in 23, especially 23, so I am going to put McLaren here in P1 just because the actual philosophy of the track yet again goes along with you need a very balanced car. That is what McLaren has, a super balanced car. So I have them favorites for Brazil with Ferrari closely following behind. They were actually pretty underrated last year It was unfortunate as to what happened to Leclerc in obviously the opening lap. The car itself, I think, will perform better here, especially in that SF24 spec they have right now. The Red Bull for me is going to be in P3 and Mercedes in P4. Tire wear is also important in Brazil if you nail that strategy on it. And weather can play a part. If it's wet, we could see a better Red Bull. But in lower downforce trim, the Red Bull has not been great. And the Mercedes had a great 22, but then in 23, the car was completely disoriented. They had no clue as to why that happened. Brazil is one of those tracks where you gotta nail it quickly because there is a sprint and it's a very particular track on the downforce that's required, but a very tricky sector 2 and 3 in a low downforce spec. That then moves us on to another very unique track, but a track that we've been to already kind of. Baku and Las Vegas have a lot of similarities. They're a street track, big long straights, they have those slow speed corners, so you know what team that's going to favor it, and particularly a great driver in these streets is Charles Leclerc. Carlos also had a very underrated qualifying in Las Vegas, but because the sewer pipe went up and kaboom into his car, he had to take a grid penalty, which was quite ridiculous. He would have been lined up with Leclerc in both P1 and 2. Ferrari will be strong here. They have good straight line speed, but it's mainly because the car is really good in those 90-degree angles, those slow turns that street tracks have, and Leclerc outperforms the car in these street tracks. For some reason, he loves these circuits, and the car itself has worked well here. They've been able to generate a good amount of grip as well as having good straight line speed, but I do think McLaren can follow closely. Now that they don't have the mini DRS effect, I wonder if Ferrari will get a bit more of an advantage and they might be able to slip away. Tire life will be very important here because Las Vegas last year was cold. This year, with it being a bit warmer and in a better time, I'm pretty sure the tires are going to degrade pretty hard. And the grading was still bad last year. I expect it to be pretty bad this year as well. So the drivers that can control the grading as best as possible could improve their lap times by the end and actually come out with the victory. And I think Ferrari's number 1, McLaren number 2, Mercedes has been really good in these low downforce circuits, and Red Bull in number 4. I do think it's going to be close amongst the 4. Maybe not as close as Mexico, but still pretty close. I think this is where Lando needs to take a big advantage if he can, and if he can make the difference against Leclerc, who's just a specialist in street tracks. That then moves us on to Qatar, another very particular track with a lot of high-speed corners, and yet again, big-time tire degradation. As we saw in 23, they didn't even allow the drivers to try and go for their own strategy, or teams for that sake. Because of how hot it was a mandatory 3-stop. McLaren was super strong in high-speed corners last year. They still have that strength, but the car overall is even better than it was in 23. Track limits is a big thing here. The way you put in your qualifying lap will matter. Overtaking is possible, but it's not going to be as prominent as it was in 23 because now we have different tire strategies. The offset will play a part onto different teams. The way that sector 1, 2, and 3 works is being able to conserve that tire throughout a lap and actually use the best of its performance in each sector very sparingly. And in the race, being able to save the tire is super important. So it's up to Lando and Oscar to do the job. I do believe McLaren has the quickest car going into Qatar. The track conditions shouldn't be as hot and humid as last year as it is now in December. Should be a little bit chillier. That should help out the other teams behind, which puts me in a position to say Mercedes and Red Bull are actually going to be P2 here, closely following behind McLaren. And because we still have some uncertainty on Ferrari's high-speed corners, I do think Ferrari will be last year. This is the only track I'm pretty sure I've put them in last, but I think Ferrari might struggle just a little bit here in Qatar. Last track, obviously, the season finale, the championship battle. Hopefully it makes it all the way to Abu Dhabi and we get a nice spicy one because the track itself doesn't usually have too much action. The layout itself in sector 1 and 2 does actually offer a good amount of straight line speed, but it's important to keep the downforce because sector 3, you can make up a lot of lap time depending on how your car is set up. And the track itself is not necessarily a street track, but it does have a lot of those characteristics which the Ferrari loves, especially in Sector 3 where they can dominate in that slow speed section. The actual straight line speed, both Mercedes and McLaren can do very well there. Red Bull has a pretty good balanced car, and they could also have a strong Sector 3. But for me, McLaren and Ferrari are tied going into here. Both have very strong cars on a layout like this, so I expect both those teams to be fighting for the P1 position. I think Red Bull will closely follow behind, especially this is a championship battle. We're going to see Mad Max back there for sure. He's going to put in his all. Hopefully Red Bull can give him a good car here. Setup will matter a lot, and making the right compromise. Yet again, it's a tire stress track. If you don't have the tires in Sector 3, you lose a lot of lap time regardless of the amount you gain in straight line speed. And as for Mercedes, I just think that car is lacking a few tenths to be competing with the top 3 in most tracks, with the exception of something of a Las Vegas or Qatar. I think that's where the car's strengths lie. Let's see what happens in COTA. But as of right now, I do have McLaren in 5 out of the 6 races being the strongest car, tied up with Red Bull in 1 and tied up with Ferrari in 2. So I do think it can be very close amongst the teams, but it's going to matter on the driver. It's few tenths that makes up these lap times, and I fully believe the driver will make the difference in these 6 races, unless something goes really crazy and for some reason somebody brings an incredible upgrade that changes the season around. This should be a very fun finale. These last 6 races should be amazing to watch. And I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. What do you guys think? Do you think I got it wrong in any spots? What do you guys particularly think? I'd love to see a list of where you would rate McLaren all the way down to Mercedes in each track. But yet again, you guys mean the world. Go check out that second channel and subscribe here if you haven't. Please leave a like, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.